It was straight to Marathon Stadium, or should we say the ballpark, for the Hunter Eagles' latest recruits. The 4 New York Mets touched down in Australia after a 16-hour flight from the States and were more than pleased with their new home base.
It's like being back in spring training. A little different look to the field here is a good change of scenery, and looking forward to having a lot of fun.
But the quartet will also be looking for big things on the diamond. Outfielder Preston Wilson is one of the brightest young stars of the game in the States. The son of legendary Met Mookie Wilson, he was New York's #1 pick in the Players Draft in 1994.
Some potential to hit some home runs here, and as far as an outfield with the way it is, hopefully there won't be a lot of balls that fall in between the outfield that we have.
Ground staff are working overtime to transform the football park to baseball diamond, but one thing they can't change is the ground's dimensions. The pitchers realise it might be a tough season from the mound.
They said that they were going to put up a 30-foot net, and I was like, whew, thank goodness, like that, but he's not too happy about it. But I think if it's hit the center field, I'm pretty safe about staying in the park.
The Eagles start season 96 this weekend against the Monarchs in Melbourne, the first home game on November 1. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
Roundtable talks involving unions, BHP executives and Premier Bob Carr have gone some way to smoothing the ground between both parties. BHP has given a commitment to keep unions fully informed over its intentions on the future of Newcastle Steelworks. Federal talks overnight have also resulted in the establishment of a Newcastle Steel Advisory Group to keep a close eye on the issue. The advisory group will be made up of Liberal MPs headed by Senator John Tierney. The AWU is sceptical.
I think that's wonderful. We asked him to come to a meeting here 4 years ago over BHP and we've never seen him. But suddenly he trots out on the white horse, and I hope he can do something.
And despite being happy with the state talks, the AWU believes the issue is far from over. Mr Rudd says he won't discount the chance of industrial action while BHP remains non-committal.
To say there's not going to be unrest, the worker over there at the moment is totally demoralised. So, we'll just see where all that ends.
Blake Doyle, NBN News.
From the jubilation of victory to the depths of defeat, and all in 1 week. The Breakers were thumped by the Strikers 6-1 after starting the season with a crushing win themselves.
Boys were dead quiet after the game, and rightly so. They had nothing to be proud of at all.
Cosmina says 7 players were off their game on Saturday and all need to take a good look at their efforts.
There was only probably 3, maybe 4 blokes who could come out of that with any pride in the way they played at all. The rest of the guys should hang their heads in shame.
The team to play Perth will be announced on Thursday. Shane Price's injured ankle should be healed, while Clayton Zane returns from his stint in Argentina with the young Socceroos.
If his fitness is up and he looks good at training, he's probably got a good chance of starting.
Baseball, in less than a week after he arrived in Australia to join the Hunter Eagles, American outfielder Preston Wilson has gone home. Wilson broke his thumb in the Eagles season opener. His replacement fellow New York Met Fletcher Bates will arrive in Newcastle next Thursday. And the Max Lee stable is still smiling following its outstanding efforts at Caulfield on the weekend. After winning the Scalacci Stakes, Ruffles is now headed for the $300,000 Salinger Stakes at Flemington on November the 2nd, while Lee's other weekend winner Chlorophyll will start on the same day in the Hardy Brothers Classic over 1,600 metres. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
Mr Blair intends to renew the confidence of local business people. It's a tall order in light of a Hunter Valley Research Foundation report revealing a further weakening of the region's economy. But Mr Blair's not deterred.
Newcastle has always had the ability to lift itself up when everything was against it.
Mr Blair's worked in various management positions in the region, including Brambles and TNT Transport. Mr Blair concedes he has a challenging job ahead, one that will require the full support of the local community. He wants council backup.
We need the support of the council, the Newcastle City Council, to talk positives and to make the people of Newcastle, the business people, react.
Meanwhile, China's senior trade minister Zhu Zhenwan is looking for export opportunities from the Hunter. Mr Zhu is interested in the region's foodstuffs, manufactured products and wine.
China is going, seems to be grow in wine consumption.
He will spend the next 3 days touring the area. Vanessa Spark, NBN News.
The Faculty of Electronic and Computer Engineering has opened its doors to the public for the first time. On display is the culmination of 4 years learning by more than 50 students.
This is the chance where engineering students get to use all the skills they've learnt over 3.5 years focused on one particular project.
These projects include a micro mouse, which could be a cleaner's dream, with applications as a remote control vacuum cleaner. Another engineering feat is this contraption, which takes the noise and scratches out of those old records. But the highlight is this single row of LED lights, which could be the future of advertising.
As you pass by in a car or a truck or a train or a bus, whatever you like, as long as it's fast enough, the human visual system will receive the image.
Faculty lecturers say many of the students have a bright future in the workforce.
Society relies so heavily on technology nowadays, including television, and I think that's only going to increase in the future, so I think they've got a very bright future.
All eyes were on Clayton Zane at the Breakers' final training. He returned from the Young Socceroos tour on Tuesday and has been battling ever since to be fit. He was cleared for selection, not so Glenn Wilson. He's down with a recurring bout of glandular fever.
We thought he'd recovered, but he's flat as a tack. He's just got no gas in his tank at all. So until we can get him sorted out, he's having some blood tests and stuff. Kazza won't be considered for selection.
Scott Thomas replaces Glenn Wilson. There are two other changes. Shane Price returns from injury at the expense of Glenn Moore, while Zane joins Troy Halpin and Jason Bennett up front. The Breakers are coming off that big loss to Brisbane, but the form of Perth isn't much better. They've been beaten convincingly in both of their appearances.
From what I've heard, they do attack. They are very, very committed and very competitive, so it's going to be a tough one for us.
Kick-off at Breakers Stadium tomorrow at 7:30. Jonathan Upton, NBN News. 93.4 kilometres may not sound like much in comparison to some of the legs in the Classic, but this one was mostly uphill. Macquarie Pass did its best to sort out the group, a 700-metre climb over 9 kilometres. First up, German Jens Voigt. But that was only half of the battle as riders faced another ascent over the Cambaora mountain. Voigt was joined by teammates Stefan Gottschling and race leader Sven Teutenberg, and while the accolades of first across the line were for Gottschling, the result was nothing less than a team effort. Less than an hour later, stage 12, the Nowra Criterium, and Belgian Frankie van Hasenbroek sprinted away. He appeared set for a start-to-finish victory until Jan Kurtz joined in the action. A photo finish gave Kurtz the nod, but officials changed the placings, saying the Belgian interfered with Frankie's finish. Teutenberg has extended his overall lead to more than 3 minutes over Aussie Nick Gates. The German showed the way in the team's event. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
Police admit they have few clues as to the identity of who assaulted and killed Inika Hinckley and left her partially naked body to rot in Pine Creek State Forest. Speaking from Eltham, Victoria, her father Paul has no doubts about her murderer's character.
There is some individual out there who is a coward. Who can't stand to see their assault victim alive. Just a coward.
Inika's body was found on Tuesday by an RTA heavy vehicles inspector in forest about 50 metres from the Pacific Highway. She was identified by papers in her backpack. Inika was last seen in Eltham on Friday the 25th of October. According to her father, she was a founding member of one of the country's first all-female rock bands and had indicated she might head north to catch up with friends.
Yeah, she was a very warm and open, loving person, very trusting person, and that was her downfall, wasn't it?
Inika regularly hitched along the east coast, usually thumbing lifts with truckies. Described by her father as a hippie, she was wearing distinctive purple clothing and carrying a pink cotton backpack. She was 174 centimetres tall and weighed 64 kilograms. Police are urging anyone who may have seen her to contact them. Graham Singleton, NBN News.
What sets this unit development apart from any number of similar projects is the third storey. Instead of masonry, the framing is timber, an innovation made possible by recent changes to the building code. While it's a first for the state, it's a common practice in earthquake-prone areas in Japan and the United States.
An earthquake situation is much more flexible, it is much more resilient, and therefore will stand up to the movement that earthquakes create. And I think it was evidenced here in the earthquake in Newcastle many years ago.
The prefabricated timber frames are made from plantation-grown pine. The project has attracted widespread interest within the building and timber industries, senior figures today inspecting the site. It's not simply the earthquake resistance and green credentials of the building, but the construction costs, which are likely to see it copied widely.
We've got a 27-week contract. Using conventional methods, we would have been looking at probably 42 weeks.
It's approaches like this which are likely to come under the gaze of a new federal government-sponsored study announced yesterday looking at earthquake-prone areas known as the Cities Project. While primarily focused on Queensland's major population centres, the study will be framed around Newcastle's earthquake experience. Phil Hind, NBN News.
Transport Minister Brian Langton was in the Hunter today selling City Rail's new timetable and inspecting $2.8 million in upgrades to Morisset and Fassifern stations. Westlake's residents used the visit to put their case for the XPT service to stop at Fassifern station. The Toronto Chamber of Commerce is behind the push. Its president says residents wanting to catch the XPT are being inconvenienced.
The residents of this area, those 50,000 people, have to travel to places like Broadmeadow, which is at least half an hour run away, and down to Wyong and Gosford and those sorts of places to pick up that sort of service.
The Transport Minister has indicated Westlakes has a good case for the service, but also warns train services must remain competitive with faster modes of transport.
You want to make sure that you've got a rail service which is able to compete with buses, to a lesser extent I suppose with aircraft, and each time you stop the train it's a bit slower and therefore makes it less competitive.
The Chamber of Commerce is also behind a proposal to alter the Fassifern station name to include Lake Macquarie. Mr Clough claims the change will lift the lake's profile across New South Wales.
We like to have Lake Macquarie there so that you can get on the national rail grid, Lake Macquarie that is, and give it an identity, and get on the monitors in Central Railway Station and other places throughout Australia.
Over the last 3 days, the Honeysuckle Development Corporation, along with town planners and community groups, has been mapping out its vision for the Cottage Creek precinct. The three-pronged approach to developing a plan for the land is the first of its kind in New South Wales. Council planners say the joint approach is a way of fast-tracking the planning process.
You've got a multidisciplinary team of people with a variety of interests, so a lot of the negotiating that's normally done with the planning process over a period of time is actually done in a very, very short time with all the cards sitting on the table.
The Cottage Creek Master Plan includes medium-density housing, commercial buildings and parkland. The plan also allows for access to port facilities on the harbour. But while the dream has now been mapped out, private investment is needed to make it a reality.
When you talk to investors about selling sites, unless the infrastructure is there, they're not going to pay you a value that's going to equate to the government providing that infrastructure.
The Cottage Creek plan will now go to Council for consideration. The industrial action begins this week with strikes expected on separate days at John Hunter, the Mater and Belmont hospitals. The action follows a meeting of doctors last Thursday where junior doctors voted unanimously against a federal government plan to limit the number of Medicare provider numbers. Junior doctors argue they'll be prevented from entering private practice. The walkout will leave hospitals manned by skeleton staff.
Only emergency services would be provided. Obviously, elective surgery is one area that may be cut. No semi-urgent or urgent cases would be cut.
Some clinic services will be affected, while all semi-urgent and urgent cases will be seen to. Doctors say patient care will not be compromised.
Ultimately, there will probably be an increased burden of work being carried by consultants coming in to do ward rounds on their own, and the skeleton staff who are on that day will probably have to work a bit harder.
The Hunter Area Health Service says it's disappointed with the action taken by doctors. Chief Executive Officer Tim Smythe says doctors should reconsider the action and put forward alternatives to the federal government. Blake Doyle, NBN News.
8 days ago, Russell Anderson was packing his bags for Malaysia. Today, he's back in Australia, deported for attending a conference on East Timor that the Malay government had declared illegal.
They started to smash their way in. They smashed down the doors after repeatedly beating them and us trying to hold them. We never really knew what would happen because we didn't know who they were exactly and how violent they would be. We didn't know whether they had sticks, we didn't know whether they had guns or knives or what.
Although admittedly scared when demonstrators stormed the conference site, Mr Anderson was still buoyed by the publicity the event received, believing it will further the cause of the East Timorese people. The Australian Friends of East Timor have attacked Prime Minister Howard over his response. The PM described the incident as unfortunate, but said those planning to attend the conference should have respected the wishes of the host government. Mr Anderson says the meeting was never officially banned and that they were invited by non-government organisations from Malaysia.
We were actually doing what the people of that country wanted us to do. We aren't necessarily just aligning ourselves, I think, with governments in this case. We should be aligning ourselves with a democracy and human rights and peace.
Sarah Griffiths, NBN News.
Age may have wearied the last of Newcastle's Great War veterans, but almost 200 people today refuse to forget, turning out to remember the sacrifice of thousands in World War I.
That there was scarcely a family in Australia who did not suffer the loss of a loved one, a relative, a friend or neighbour.
Flags were lowered to half-mast to remember all Australia's war dead. Rather than crowds dwindling, the Armistice Day tradition is being passed to a new generation.
Of the last couple of years, there's more and more school children and more young veterans from other conflicts have been coming to come out more to these ceremonies, and that's encouraging as well, you know.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
To ensure a new generation is given every chance to remember, books outnumbered floral tributes at the foot of the cenotaph.
Unless we educate young children and young people to understand those aspects of our heritage which are reflected in days like today, then we lose a very important part of what we're all about.
The books were presented to local schools for their libraries. Phil Hind, NBN News. According to Jenny George, morale at BHP is at an all-time low. After a tour of the plant, the ACTU boss told senior management unions don't accept the writing is on the wall for steelmaking in Newcastle. Ms George points to diversification at BHP's Port Kembla plant, describing Newcastle as a poor cousin. She also questions why there are almost 2 white-collar workers to every 1 blue-collar employee.
We've seen the workers there make enormous contribution, enormous sacrifices, and I'm not convinced that we've seen the same reform go on at middle management and senior management levels.
Ms George will meet Industry Minister John Moore next month to demand a federal inquiry into Australia's steel industry.
And that I don't think the problems are confined any longer to Newcastle. I think what we are looking at and staring at in the face is the whole future of steelmaking in Australia.
It's also planned to hold a national meeting of all BHP-related unions. Unions warn if Newcastle looks like closing, it will spark Australia-wide industrial action.
BHP want them to react that way too, I have no doubt about that, because that then makes us the baddies and BHP the goodies.
An announcement from BHP on the future of Newcastle isn't expected until next February. Management and workers at the Rundle's factory are grateful for any support in their battle with the bank. Today, Australia's top union official added her weight to the campaign, attacking Westpac's decision to call in the receivers. Her criticism came as Westpac announced a 20% increase in annual profit to more than $1 billion.
Westpac has got more than an obligation just to make billions of dollars in profits. It should also have a social obligation. I mean, I understand there are some financial difficulties the company's facing. I think the bank ought to adopt a lenient and sympathetic attitude.
The company, which employs almost 300 workers, mostly women, is almost $5 million in the red. However, apart from criticising the bank, there's nothing the ACTU can do to assist Rundles. Even so, the company was grateful for the high-profile support.
Look, we've had wonderful support from a lot of people, and certainly pleased to have her support.
According to Rundles, the company has been given until next April to trade its way out of difficulties. At the same time, it's understood the receivers, Ferrier Hodson, are under instructions from the Westpac Bank to attempt to sell the business as a going concern. Rundles has a number of lucrative contracts with the Defence Forces waiting in the wings, all dependent on the company emerging from receivership. Rundles management is due to meet with the receivers again tomorrow. Phil Hind, NBN News.
The two engineering research centres will receive a total of $1.5 million each year for 3 years. The Centre for Integrated Dynamics and Control will focus on helping large industrial companies such as BHP improve their performance.
Well, we're hoping in the first 3 years to begin our work, to start to work with industry, to develop some preliminary products which we can get out into industry and try our ideas. Of course, that'll just be the first step in a longer-term proposal.
The second centre, Multi-Phase Processes, will try to learn more about the behaviours of very small particles, such as blue-green algae, in water supplies.
What we're trying to do is to get a process which will remove blue-green algae from drinking water in a very cheap and cost-effective way. But to do that, we need to know a lot more about the way these very fine particles behave in water.
60-year-old Alan Cook was the fourth person to die at BHP in 7 months. He was part of a work crew demolishing unsafe equipment near the sinter plant when an awning collapsed, crushing him to death in November last year. Coroner Cole Elliott today found that the workers had no formal training in demolition and the job had not been assessed by an engineer. He believes that at least 16 days before Mr Cook's death, someone cut with an oxyacetylene torched the braces which had supported the awning. However, he said, "I am unable to determine who performed this work." He went on to say, "What is of concern is it was not observed nor recorded by anyone." Since the tragedy, BHP has changed its guidelines on demolition to include an engineer's report and risk assessment. The work is also now carried out by licensed contractors. The company has also implemented hearing tests for all employees. Mr Cook was hard of hearing and did not hear the warning that could have saved his life. Jodie McKay, NBN News.